good day, and thanks for joining our talk at the Qt World Summit today. I'm Corey Pendleton, a solutions engineer with the Qt Group, and part of the presentation team today. One of the key goals of the Qt framework is to simplify the process of developing applications and devices to save you, the developer, and the designer time, and to make it fast and fun. And one area we've devoted time into is the designer to developer collaboration. But there are still some tips and good practices being discovered, and we want to share some of those with you today. We're a team of technical artists and solutions engineers. We work each day with customers to learn what they need from a framework and uncover how the Qt toolkit can support them. We have the chance to build demos and use the tools, and that's helped us to define some of these good practices in support of the workflow. Now, Emmanuel will introduce the key concepts of the workflow and our agenda of topics for the day.
Thank you, Corey. I am a solution engineer from the Qt company with a background of developers. I would like to give you an input about what Qt is providing generally. So Qt is a full ecosystem to be able for the designer, the developer, and the tester to collaborate. Qt has been known for a framework 25 years ago to be able to provide a full framework to do really nice user interfaces, core APIs, and connectivity APIs. Today, we will focus mostly on the UI part. As you may know, Qt supports 3D and 2D UIs. All about our collaboration between designer and developer, we mainly talk about UI. We will focus on multiple things. As you may deal with some designers in the past, they are using totally different tools than the developers. What we want is that we can bridge them directly with the QML and helping them to export their design from Figma, Photoshop, SketchUp, Adobe XD directly to the Qt ecosystem and generating some code with QML. Today, we will provide you some tips to be able, first with Arno, to export really well from the Figma bridge, directly setting well to be able to export and extract the most of your design into Design Studio. Then, Jason will bring you to Design Studio and will show you how from a static UI, you can create a really nice control from it. Then we have designers that change their mind and need to do some change in Figma. I will give you some tips about how you can merge properly from, I will say, Figma to Design Studio after you have done some work on Design Studio and how to do it effectively. And then we will hand over to Corey that will conclude on the backend integrations and will show you how you can integrate some C++ code with the UI in the best way. I hand over to Arno that will provide you all the info that you need to know about the Figma bridge.
Thank you, Emmanuel. My name is Arno Armingo. I'm a technical artist from the Qt company. Let's have a look on Figma and give you some tips about how to export properly your design from Figma before importing on Design Studio. And let's present you the HMI of my colleague Jason. We have here a couple of screens, of course, all the components, which include the different icons. What we propose to you is a plugin named Qt Bridge. Here, the Qt Bridge for Figma. The goal of this bridge, as explained Emmanuel before, is to export all your design, screen, and components by pressing in this blue button. But before, let me share with you a couple of tips to use it properly. And let's start with the most important, the main action of the bridge. How export my layer, my group, and my components by using the Export As panel. We have the choice between component, child, merge, and skipped. Because of you use Figma, you create components. You will export components, of course, as a component and generate a QML file for each of them. Per default, all your export will be exported as a child, but we add two other choices, to merge and to skip, to simplify the export. Merge, for example, allows the designer to not export layer per layer if you have not actioned or animation of the layer. The main principle of the bridge is to export all your design, screen, component, and others. To allow the designer to not have to create a special file, especially to export, we add this option. Choose what you want to export. Another tips for the Figma bridge, the ID. So the second main action is to name your layers, all your groups and components. In this case, the naming, the structure of your naming is important. Remember that on Design Studio, you will generate some QML code. If we talk about the compliancy between designer and developer, it's very important to have a look on how name all your graphical assets. Let's remember that if there are some issue on your export, for example, you duplicate some layer, the bridge will automatically add some number or modify your name to avoid to export different assets with the same wording. But let's try to do it properly. You have to structure your naming by using a clear nomenclature, a logic way to name your assets. Please use the camel case protocol, except for the components. For your components, do not hesitate to start with uppercase. By this way, the work of the designer on Design Studio and after for the developer will be easier. A last tips for using our Qt bridge. We give you the capabilities to generate a Design Studio component directly from Figma. We'll have a look with JSON of how animate this setting. Here, we give you the capabilities to enter directly on the bridge all the parameters of an arc item, for example. The goal here is to not recreate on Design Studio this kind of component, but directly ask to export as an arc item here. Let's use the data from Figma Inspect to enter on your bridge the different parameters like position, size, arc end, arc start, stroke, and color. Now, I let Jason explain you how work Design Studio.
Hi, I'm Jason Mans. I'm a technical artist here at the Qt company. Today I'm going to be walking through the various ways you can create controls in Design Studio, including using custom assets that were imported in from Figma. So here we are in Design Studio. We can see that our Figma assets are already imported in, quickly showing what the Figma file looks like. We can see that I had two variants set up in Figma, and those variants are going to be brought into Design Studio automatically converted into states for me. And we can see in Design Studio at the bottom here in the states panel. So there's a few ways to create custom controls in Design Studio. The first and the quickest way would be to come up to File, select New File, and then choose the specific control that I would like to make. So I'll select Dial, and what this is doing is creating a new component in my project, a new UI QML file. The states are all set up for me, and the QML is also written out for me. If I live preview this in Design Studio, we can see that this control is just working right out of the box. So this can be a very quick way to add a control to your project that you would like to make custom. Going back to our Figma component that we imported in, we want to turn these assets into a custom working dial. I'm going to walk through that process now. The first thing I'm going to be doing is making an arc item to act as a rotation basis for our handle. Find the arc component in our library, and then just drag and drop it in our navigator. Now I want to size this arc item to line up with this background shape, so it rotates in this asset from Figma. So now it's lined up, but I don't want it to be visual. I don't want this red. I want it to have no opacity. So I'm just going to come to the stroke color, change it to 8 zeros, which will make it transparent. So the arc is still there, but we just can't see it. So I'm going to grab this dot, this handle, and make it a child of the arc item that we just created. So I'll just drag and drop it over the arc item. So now it's a child of this arc. So when I rotate this arc now, it'll also rotate the child, which is the handle. So with that done, I'm just going to line it up to the beginning point. The next step I'm going to do is create a new timeline. So I'm going to go to the timeline tab here at the bottom, hit the plus icon. I'm going to change the start and the end frame to 50 and 90 respectively. And I'll explain why I'm choosing these values here in a second. So now we have our timeline set up, and we can see that here at the bottom in the timeline panel. We're going to animate the arc's rotation across this timeline. So I'm going to make sure my playhead is at the very beginning of the timeline there. And then in the rotation in the properties panel, insert a keyframe. Then I'm going to scrub my playhead to the very end of the timeline. And then I'm going to rotate this arc item to the very end. And then I'm going to insert another keyframe. So now if we play through this timeline, we can see that handle animating around that arc. Now we can add any other kind of animations to this timeline as well. So I'm going to come to the very end here. I'm going to select this text item, and I'm going to insert a keyframe for the text color at the very end. I'm going to grab my playhead and scrub to the very beginning and change the color to something else. And I'm just going to insert another keyframe there. So now we can see that it's animating both the color of text and the rotation of that arc and handle. And we want to now add the functionality to the control. So to add that interaction, we're going to first import in the Qt Quick Controls module to our component library. This will give us access to all of the Qt Quick controls here, and we want specifically the dial. So I'm just going to grab this dial and add it to our file. And we want this dial, similar to the arc, to be the same size so it lines up with that background asset. So there we can see it's now lined up. It'll be to come to our dial, and we're going to change the values, the from and the to values, to match our timeline settings. So 50 to 90. So now that we have those values set up there, we're going to hop into QML real quick and find our timeline. And we're going to add a line under the timeline that is going to be current frame, and it'll autofill for us. Current frame, and then whatever our dial was called, in this case, thermo dial, and then value. It's now lining up with the current frame of that timeline we created from 50 to 90. But I don't want the actual dial control to be visible. So I'm just going to select the dial and change the opacity to 0. And we can see that working there. I think the last step that I want to add is to have this number also associated with the current frame of the timeline. Go to the text properties, and we're going to set a binding. Thermo dial dot value to fixed. And again, if we live preview that, we'll see that this value now is changing depending on the current frame of the timeline. So that is how to very quickly and easily create a custom dial component based on assets that were imported in from Figma. So now I'm going to hand things back over to Emmanuel, where he's going to explain how to properly merge QML from Figma to Design Studio.
Thanks, Jason. Let's deep dive now how we should merging design between Figma and Design Studio. To be able to do this, you first to have a really good collaborations and good communications between the person responsible from the Figma and Design Studio. But let's first deep dive on what you need to do before any merging. So what you need to take care before and at the startup of your project is before, I will say, starting to work on Design Studio, is that you take care that your design has been exported properly. So work on your design, test the import of it in Design Studio, check that it's filled your requirements. If not, go back in your Figma, change how you export it, re-import it in Design Studio until you are fairly happy with it. Because if you are trying to merge something that it's not perfect, you will have some issue because it will re-import in the wrong way anyway when it will be merging it. Okay, so take time of this. You also need to define some IDs that needs to be unique. Take really a lot of time to define it because afterwards you will not be able to modify it anymore. What I think also, it's always easier to manage small items, small things. So create some small reusable components in Figma. Okay, that is really important that you create atomic components that you try to reuse everywhere in your user interfaces. Then you also will need, before any merging, save and push all your change on your best version control system like Git or SVN. Okay, that it's really important that you save all your work, and it also help you to do the diff after the merge, and it will help you a lot on this. If I can give you some tips of a good merge, is important when you have done this, so before the merging, after the merging, that you don't do any change in the layers hierarchy. Okay, so that's why it's really important that you take time to save your IDs, that you take time during the first import to check that all the hierarchy are done properly. You are using the same ID before the merge in order to ease the merging process, and that the merging process is not recreating new things from that point. Okay. The second advice that I would like to give you when you are trying to merge is don't hesitate to use the skipped capabilities. Okay. By default, the Figma bridge will re-export your whole project. So you can try to skip everything that you are not needed for the merge and only merge what you are needed. For example, if you are recreated full controls directly on before the merge, take care of maybe not exporting it again if there is no change in it. Okay, it's not a need to re-export everything at all times. Just be careful about the dependencies of what you are skipping, because if you are skipping something that has dependency somewhere else, you may encounter some errors. Fortunately, we will have soon in our roadmap the capabilities of having some partial export. So this will come sooner with us. Okay, so that's something important. Then when you are in Design Studio, for me, it's important to differentiate two kinds of files. There is the UI.qml and QML files. Those two files are for two different purposes at the end. As you have seen, Design Studio is a tool that gives you the capabilities of generating codes from some drag and drop and from our designer, what you see is what you get tools. But unfortunately, it does not support everything about QML. And when a developer wants to extend the work of the designers, it needs to do it in a QML file, because if it does some changes that are not supported in this list inside a UI.qml, you will not be able to change it in the designer modes, and more problematically, you can also have some problem in your merge. So for me, it's quite important that you are differencing this UI.qml and QML files, and the UI.qml is for the designers, and the QML file is for the developers, giving him the capability, for example, to connect it to his backend. For more information about how to connect the C++ backend with your UI.qml that you have done, I will hand over to Corey right now.
Thanks, Emmanuel. Now that we've seen how to create your UIs graphically and iterate on those designs, the next question we always get is, how do we connect real backend data? This is important because maintaining the separation of the data model and the view is critical software design principle. But how can we add that model without breaking the designable view? Here's one method we found that works well. First, you need to add your C++ class. You add it into a subfolder within your imports folder. That's already been created by Design Studio when you created your new project. And that's already part of the QML import path. Within CMake, you need to define a QML module. The URI that you specify for the API must match the folder name where you've placed your module. This is important so that we can maintain synchronization between Design Studio and Qt Creator. You don't have to add it as a separate library, as I did here. You could add the module directly into your main project, but that choice is up to you. Once you've added those C++ files as a QML module, these QML macros in the header specify how the C++ gets exposed to QML. There are several options of QML element type, but I've used the most straightforward one, and this is an object which can be instantiated through declaration in a QML file. So by adding QML element to my header, this class will now be available in QML. Now we can instantiate that object in QML. So I've done this by placing it within our constants QML, which is a singleton that's created for you again by Design Studio. This is intended to be a global data source for weather. And so that's why I put it here within a singleton. There are a couple of other ways that you could create your C++ class itself as a singleton. But this was the most straightforward way for me. Now that it's been imported in constants.qml, I can instantiate the object, and it's a property within constants called weather model, and it's instantiating an object of the app model class. Finally, I can now refer to that backend data in my QML through the constants singleton by dereferencing constants dot the property name, weather model, and now I have access to the public properties of the weather, or of the app model rather, which has the valid weather property and a weather object that has the temperature data. But what about Design Studio? It doesn't know about weather model yet. So here's how we solve that. We create QML files that have the same name as each C++ class I need to expose to QML. These will mock up an identical API, and I put also a QML dir file in the same folder to describe the mock module. I like to put the QML and the C++ in the same folder so that I keep all of the relevant data and APIs together and make sure I don't forget to keep them in sync. Here's the content of the app model QML file. So a Qt object is a basic non-visual type in QML. All of the property names declared here match what was in my C++ header. The QML dir that you see here declares the name of the module, which matches the module we gave in the CMake lists.txt file for the URI. And now Design Studio knows about a QML module with the same name, the same object names, and the same property names as my C++ classes. It's very important that developers who make changes to the backend API, the public API, update the mock QML to ensure designers can continue their work. It's one extra step for the developer, but it enables that parallel workflow that we're really striving to protect with this process. And now back in Design Studio, I'm able to dereference constants.weatherModel, and all of these properties are valid and refer to the mock QML data when I'm in Design Studio. Design team can make changes to the data and see that reflected on the UI, and it won't impact the actual backend implementation that I've brought in as a developer. Thank you again for joining us today. We continue to work together with the development team to improve these processes and documentation, and look forward to making the Qt product more fun, fast, and productive for you than ever before. It's been a pleasure to share the good practices we've learned with you, from utilizing the bridge to creating components, merging iterations on your QML, and hooking up backends. We hope this gives you helpful information on how you can make the best use of the tools available to you with the Qt framework.